If you're looking for more grant proposal success, this is part 2, steps 6 through 10 of the 15 steps you must take before you write a grant proposal. Welcome back to Nonprofit Docs, where we offer remedies for what ails your nonprofit. I'm your host, Dr. Marc Hardy, and hopefully you've watched part 1, steps 1 through 5 first, so the next steps will make your proposal even better. So let's get to it. Step number 6. You have to know how the game is played, how funding decisions are really made. One way is by the program officer alone. Sometimes in foundations, a program officer, whether it be for education or food insecurity or the arts, whatever it could be, makes the decision based on their own expertise about what should be funded. So that's one reason it's very important to know who the program officer is. Sometimes those decisions are made by the board with program officer recommendations. So the board sits around, they probably look at an abstract, which is 2 or 3 paragraphs. Maybe they look at the budget. Maybe they have 10 proposals in front of them that have been recommended by the program officer. And they turn to the program officer and say, well, there are 10 proposals. We can only fund 5. Which 5 do you think are the best? And the program officer will usually weigh in and say, well, I particularly like these 5. Now it's still up to the board, but they always ask for the recommendation of the program officer or the program director. So the next way is by board members who have pet projects. That's right. Board members often have their own nonprofits that they feel an affinity to. Maybe they've sat on a board. Maybe their son or daughter or relative works for the nonprofit or is on the board. Maybe they know the person personally through other channels. But sometimes this funding experience is not exactly good. So let me give you an example. A friend of mine developed a documentary, a film on philanthropy, and it was about a $100,000 project. He put about $30,000 of his own money in. He got another $20,000 from some other foundations. And he went to a couple other foundations for the other $50,000. And all of these foundations said they funded film projects in their guidelines on their website. But in fact, he found out that at least one of them said, oh, no, we don't do that anymore after he got declined for funding. And then the other one said, oh, no, we don't fund films anymore. We don't fund videos. And come to find out, at the same time he was applying for funds, another filmmaker applied for funds, and they funded that filmmaker. And it was not about philanthropy. Now, you would think that foundations would want an educational video about philanthropy, but when he pressed them on the issue, when he found out, the program officer said, well, one of the board members was a personal friend of this person who put in this proposal for a video. And so they decided to go ahead and fund it. So there you go, politics at play, all right? The other reason you might want to know who the board members are that reason, of course, you would like to have that kind of connection, even though it seems a little unethical, but that's the way it works sometimes. The Lilly Endowment, for instance, each board member has a special fund, I guess you could call it, where if they personally donate, let's say $1,000 to an organization, the Lilly Endowment will match that 9 times. So if they donate $1,000, Lilly Endowment will fund $9,000, so it's a $10,000 donation. So it would pay to know somebody on the board of the Lilly Endowment, right? This is the way things work, and they all work differently. Sometimes these things are made by committee, and I've served on these committees. One prime example of a foundation that does this by committee is the Community Foundation of Elkhart County. It's no big secret. Almost every segment of their funding is decided on by a committee that is drawn from the public, from the people who live in the Elkhart County area. And that's good and bad. On one hand, you know that they are in touch with community needs. On the other hand, you hope that they are trained in how to really evaluate grant proposals and that there are not pet projects that they have in mind. But because it's a community foundation, having committees from the community seems like a pretty good idea, but it's probably not a bad idea to find out who's on that committee who would fund your kind of project. Again, it's about personal connection. Now, my personal experience with funding, especially being on the decision side, was twofold. One was the Indiana Arts Commission in Indianapolis, and the other was a famous family foundation in Indiana. I was on committees for both of them. And in the Indiana Arts Commission, they had very specific guidelines about what they wanted you to look for. They walked you through what they felt were the criteria that they were looking for, and your decisions were to be based pretty much on that criteria. And they didn't have a lot of money, and that's the one thing. If you're in the arts, you got to understand that the pile of money for the arts is much smaller than, let's say for people who are impoverished or for education, so on and so forth. So the competition is tougher, and you have to be really on your toes to get money if you're in an arts organization. Now, the other thing that I did was I was on a committee for a famous family foundation, and there were 5 of us on this committee. And we decided that out of the 70 or 80 proposals we got, we would fund 5 of them. And so we went to the board, which was mostly family members, and we said, here are the 5 that we recommend. And they didn't like our recommendations at all, and they scrapped the whole thing and decided to make the grants themselves. They made the decisions, mostly the founder and his wife. And our time, we had spent hours and hours of reading these, and then, of course, a half a day in committee. We were volunteers, and needless to say, I did not volunteer to do that again. So sometimes, the committee makes the decision and the board or the family makes a different decision because we're basically just making recommendations. In terms of what is looked at on the grants, I usually look at, of course, the abstract first, which is the 2 or 3 paragraphs at the very beginning, which boils down the proposal. It's a very important part of it. And then the needs statement, and then the budget. Now, why do I look at the budget? Well, because if the budget is done poorly, then it's a strike against the proposal. If they haven't done their homework on the budget, then I have to wonder if they were careless in other places. Examples of a bad budget would be underestimating or overestimating salaries or equipment, or the numbers just don't add up. Or there are some organizations that pad the budget to ask for more than necessary, thinking, well, of course, if the foundation offers us less money, then we'll be covered. You don't want to do that because decision makers will wonder if you're asking for funds that will also cover other expenses that are not connected to that proposal. So, example, if you add a 10% buffer in the case of a foundation grant, and they know how much things cost. Or you're underestimating, stating that you're going to hire a full-time fundraising professional for $30,000 a year, including benefits. That's not going to happen. Either you're not going to get anybody, or you're going to get somebody that's very unqualified and isn't going to do a good job. So the next way decisions are made are by the president or the executive director. They have sole discretion. And that's why it's important to find out how the decisions are made. And Magic Step 15 in Part 3 will help us do that, I promise you. But you got to do these other steps first. So step number 7, the do's and don'ts of grant proposals. Do not write or send a proposal until you have done the first 15 steps we're talking about here, because you don't want to mess up. You don't want your reputation to get sullied. Do these first, and you'll be very happy you did. It'll leave you very focused and give you the kind of funders that are actually going to give you money. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to mass send a proposal to 100 foundations that say, dear sir, or dear ma'am, or dear committee, or dear grant proposal officer, without it being personalized. And it's the same form letter for everybody. Here's the thing. Foundations have their own forms. Usually you have to go online, and they're very specific about how many words for each section. and what they ask for and so on and so forth. So you just can't send a generic proposal to 100 foundations. They're going to throw it in the trash. Trust me. When the receptionist gets it and looks at it, one of their jobs is to find out, did they follow the funding guidelines or didn't they? And if they didn't, goes into file 13. So don't waste your time or your postage. The way to send a proposal that you want to get multiple funding from different foundations is this. You have to reveal the fact that you're applying to other foundations in the grant proposal. So break down your budget. Say you're asking for 75,000, 25,000 from this foundation, 25,000 from that foundation, 25,000 from another foundation, and be very upfront about it. There are two reasons for that. Number one, it tells them, okay, this person has done their homework and they're being honest. The other thing that it tells them is that they need to probably contact these other two foundations to find out if they're considering funding your proposal. And if they are, that's a good thing. They like to make their money leveraged. They like to have other people in on the funding. So if three foundations talk to each other and they all like the proposal, the chances of it getting funded are going to be much better. Okay. Also, don't think of your proposal as the end of your interaction with the funder, even after you get funded, but rather the beginning. You want to build a long-term relationship with them because all the 15 steps that you've done to write that proposal, that's quite a bit of work. And you don't want that to go to waste. You want to leverage that and build on that momentum, and you want to contact them while you're doing the program, give them updates, even if they don't ask for them. You want to invite them to the program that they have funded. You want to do anything to let them know that they're important and that they're your partner. This is important, that they're your partner in solving these problems that you're trying to get rid of. So, in summary, don't go under budget or over budget, and don't try to fake your way through the proposal. Keep in contact with your funder. Step 8, your board of directors' role in the grant writing process is important. If you want to have success, you've got to have the board involved. Number one, most funders will ask for a list of your board of directors with a short bio. Now, don't just send them a list of names. You need to put a short bio under each of them. And you can do this once and you can use it over and over in other proposals because it's kind of boring. This is what most people ask for. But you need to write that little bio so that these board members have credibility, whether they're community leaders, they're bankers, they're business owners, they're, maybe they're on a foundation board, whatever it is, you're looking to put as much credibility out there as possible. So don't be shy about your board of directors. Also, the board of directors are important in terms of their connections with funders. If you have wealthy people on your board or people who are well known in the community, chances are they are friends with people on the boards of foundations and other funders. And you could go to them and say, hey, can you put in a good word for us? Could you tell them about our organization? Could you tell them that we are about to submit a proposal? And what do they think? Whatever they can do, just making the funder board member aware that this person sits on your board. Again, it's about human connection. It's about influence. Well, you might think that's not right, but that's the way things are. Okay. So there's an importance of every board member knowing your mission statement, which should be short because they need to be your ambassadors, especially to people who are thinking about giving you funding. Now, the problem is most board members can't recite your mission statement. That's right. Go around the table at your next board meeting and ask them to tell you what your mission statement is. I would say that probably at least 75% of them can't do it, or they will struggle. And one of the reasons they struggle is it's too darn long. A lot of nonprofits put paragraph long mission statements in their mission. And the thing is, it should be one line. It should be 10 words or less so it can be easily remembered. And you want to make sure that once you get it down to 10 words or less on one line, that every board member has it memorized so that when somebody says, hey, I hear you said on XYZ board, what's that all about? Boom, they can do it right away. They can do it for a funder, they can do it for a potential donor, they can do it for people in the community. It's really, really important that they succinctly are able to communicate your mission statement. And in addition to that, hopefully sharing a story about why they support your cause. This is important because some people wonder, why would you volunteer for a board? Well, it's usually because there's a personal connection. And those stories are important because the stronger the personal connection of the board member, the more they can make the case to other people, funders, people outside your organization, etc. And lastly, it's important that every board member make a financial contribution to your organization. I know they volunteer a lot of time. They probably sit on committees, so on. I don't care if it's $10 a year. I don't care if it's $100 a year, $1,000 a year. There's one hospital in New York City that to sit on their board, it's understood that you have to make a financial contribution of $250,000 a year. Okay. So it's not so much the amount that the board member gives. It's the fact that every one of them contributes so that you can say to a funder or a donor, oh yeah, 100% of our board contributes financially to our organization. Because if they don't, the funder or the foundation is going to say, if your board members aren't giving to your organization, then why should we? If the people who basically are your organization and the board is the nonprofit, they're the one thing that is the constant. If they're not making a financial contribution, each and every one of them, then why should an outside funder? So you need to make that case to your board member. And again, it doesn't matter if it's $10 a year, $100,000 a year, whatever is most comfortable for your board members. Let's go on. You want to approach a foundation like you would approach a bank. That's right. Foundations, like banks, want to fund successful organizations and ventures. This is why the track record of an organization is important, as well as the bios of your executive director and staff and board. Those are also important for the same reason. So the failure of foundation grants is historically high. I had an acquaintance, a friend of mine, who worked in a major foundation, and he was head of the education grants. And after he retired, I said, okay, can you be honest about what goes on inside a foundation? He said, well, I will tell you this. Now that I'm retired, I can admit that probably 65% of the grants that we gave out were not successful. They did not accomplish what they said they were going to accomplish. And it's really hard to fund nonprofits that you know are going to do what they say they're going to do. So the more credibility you have, the better. Step number 10. Seeing is more powerful than telling. So again, invite your funders to your board meetings, events, and programs of progress. If you are feeding impoverished people, invite them to a meal or ask them to help volunteer. If you're teaching children a skill, invite them to a class. If you're a theater, invite them to a performance. Let me give you a couple stories that make the importance of this point pretty vividly. When I first started the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, well, it's Notre Dame, Indiana, I was born and raised in that area, but I didn't know much about the Center for the Homeless because it was in a town next to where I grew up. And the dean of the business school had bought a table at their annual fundraiser at a place called Century Center. She asked me if I would want to go and take up one of the seats. I said, sure. So I went. And the Center for the Homeless, of course, takes in homeless people, but it does more than that. It helps them get on their feet, helps them get jobs, helps them get back into society. And the executive director got up for about 5 minutes and basically explained what the Center for the Homeless does. But what was brilliant was he found 3 people who had been what they call guests at the Center for the Homeless, who had gone on and made a better life. He had them come back and tell their story. And I remember all their stories, but the one I remembered most vividly was one of a 17-year-old girl. She and her mother and her 2 sisters were homeless. Their father had left them. They didn't have any money. And they lived at the Center for the Homeless in a special unit. And they lived there for a couple of years. And she told her story, and it was a very moving story. But the real kicker was at the end, she said, because we lived at the Center for the Homeless, I was able to do well in my schoolwork, and I am the valedictorian of my class. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you, somebody could have come to me and told me this story, but to hear it from the person who experienced it, I whipped out my checkbook and I wrote a check right there as a contribution. It was so profoundly important to me because I thought, if they can do this for this young girl, what else are they doing? Right? So it's important to invite people to your fundraisers and to tell your story. Don't stand up there and tell them, oh, we helped 10,000 people, or we did. Give them some powerful, moving stories. The other thing that happened was when I was at Butler University had a community art school where they would send out their students who were in the dance program or theater program or music program, and they would teach these arts to children in the community who were underserved. A lot of them lived in poverty, and they had about, I think, 8 or 10 locations around the city in Indianapolis where they would do this. And one of the foundations gave us the same amount every year. And it just so happened that a former classmate of mine had just taken over as director of that foundation. And I called her up and I said, look, why don't you come and spend a half a day with me and see what this program's all about? You're already funding it. I want you to see what they're really doing here. And she said, fine. So she came. We spent an afternoon, went to 3 different locations. They were drumming in one. They were playing guitar in another. They were dancing in another. And the kids were just having a ball. And they were learning. They were into it. And we went out for a cup of coffee after, we went on our little visit. And she said, I had no idea the impact that these programs were having on the children in our community. She said, thank you for inviting me. And I said, well, thank you for coming, taking a half a day out of your busy day. About a month later, she called me up and she said, Mark, I have to tell you, after my visit, that community art school has really been on my mind. And we have decided that we're going to double your funding this year. And not only that, we have our own charter school, and we want your students to come in and teach our children arts because we don't have an arts program, and we will pay for that as well. And so just from doing that one visit, just from inviting them in to see the program, we doubled our funding, probably closer to tripled our funding from that particular funder. It works. Why? Because they see a connection between their funding and making the world a better place. Well, that ends part 2, steps 6 through 10. So let's move on to part 3, steps 11 through 15. And the final magic step, step 15, that very few people do, that substantially increases your chances of success when it comes to grant proposals. If you liked what you learned and you want to know when more videos are posted, just click like and subscribe. And if you want an outline transcript of this video, just click below. If you missed part 1, steps 1 through 5, well, click here. And for part 3, steps 11 through 15, and the final magic step, click here or on the link below.